Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Charles the Band Student, and welcome you guys to another episode of the Dreamerspro Show, where we cover everything from sports, hot topics, classic debates, entertainment, and when we give you guys a fresh perspective on things and how we see them. And today we got a pretty interesting show for you guys. But before we get into it, please make sure you like the video and subscribe to the channel. And if you want today's full show, be sure to check out the Dreamerspro podcast. We have that pinned in the comments section. We're on Spotify and iTunes. Anyway, let me get into this topic here. So now these sports media streets is full of beef all over the place, right? We got different people beefing with each other. What am I talking about? As you guys know, Skip Bayless and Stephen A. Smith are the two top dogs in the sports media world, especially if we're talking about corporate sports media guys that are on television. You know, Skip Bayless has his own show out there in FS1. Stephen A. Smith has his own show. Unquestionably, the face of that network at ESPN First Take, he has his own show there. But there's some history behind that show. Originally, it was Skip Bayless's show, and the show was originally called Cold Pizza. Skip Bayless was essentially performing the role that you see Stephen A. Smith performing today on the show, which is he's the constant, and then you have a rotating cast that comes in every day to debate Stephen A. Smith on a range of topics every single day. Originally, that was Skip Bayless's position, and Stephen A. Smith was a contributor on ESPN First Take. Then I think there was some sparks between the two of them. Then they elected to go with the two-man debate format, and then it became ESPN First Take, and then it was Stephen A. Smith, Max Kellerman, and then left, and then Stephen A. Smith went back to the old format that Skip Bayless perfected. And then Skip Bayless shifted over to FS1. About a year or so ago, there was a public dispute that took place between Stephen A. Smith and Skip Bayless, and it was centered on the inception of, not the inception, but the turning point for ESPN First Take when it really took off and started achieving astronomical ratings. And essentially what happened was Stephen A. Smith went on a show and, to paraphrase, basically said Skip Bayless came to him seeking his need. He was like, I need your help to take the show to the next level. So can you please work with me? And Skip Bayless remembered it in a totally different way. And he pushed back on Stephen A. Smith, and he took exception with some of the things that Stephen A. Smith said. Ultimately, the two gentlemen met in person. They had a conversation and they hashed it out. But Skip Bayless pushed back vehemently on Stephen A. Smith. And if you go to his channel and if you look at his most popular videos, those were among the most popular shows that channel produced. So what happened recently? They were kind of having this conversation where essentially Stephen A. Smith started talking about the time when ESPN First Take had a probationary period, and basically Skip Bayless said the reason that happened was because of some of the things that Stephen A. Smith said, and then Stephen A. Smith said no, that wasn't the reason, it was because of the Tim Tebow coverage, and then Skip Bayless came back. So they've kind of they've gotten into this back and forth, and essentially what happened was last night Stephen A. Smith essentially produced a show responding to the last thing that Skip Bayless said, where he basically confronted the facts that he laid bare and said, no, you're absolutely wrong. So what we want to do is we actually want to play a little bit of what Skip Bayless said that Stephen A. Smith is responding to, because it's going to give Stephen A. Smith's comments more context. So what we want to do is we want to play what Skip Bayless had to say in terms of what really happened at ESPN First Take, and then we're going to come back. Take a listen to what Skip Bayless had to say here.
When he revises history about early First Take, I'm going to respond. When he says that I told the truth about something, but not the whole truth about that something, then I am going to tell the utterly complete truth about that something, as I'm about to do right now. And then Stephen A. subsequently, I'm pretty sure it was on his podcast, made the case that I was a big reason that we were on probation. He also took some blame on himself because he had been suspended, he said, over some remarks he'd made about the Ray Rice situation. Well, it's true he was suspended, but just for the record, that happened a year and a half after Richard Sherman happened. So that suspension had nothing to do with us being on probation at this point, March the 7th, 2013. I'll get to the why of it in just a moment. But Stephen A. is saying that the bosses at ESPN did not like my Tim Tebow coverage, and that was a reason, if not a big reason, that we were on probation in March of 2013. By the way, my Tim Tebow coverage happened 2 football seasons back, 2 back, in 2011. And again, Richard Sherman happened March the 7th of 2013. So I'm going to quote Stephen A. Again, I think it's from his podcast. He says, that's the part that Skip left out. I wasn't the only reason that probationary period per se, for that probationary period per se. It existed because the network wanted to make sure that our show wasn't one that just generated ratings, but one that didn't cause them embarrassment and shame. Stephen A. goes on to say, the public had accused Skip Bayless of being a caricature of himself. And even though Skip was very proud of his Tim Tebow coverage, the bosses weren't necessarily enamored with it. And Stephen A. goes on to say, now, I didn't want to talk about Tebow every day. Stephen A. joined me full-time late in that football season of 2011. So he says, now, I didn't want to talk about Tebow every day, but to be fair to Skip, it did elevate the popularity of the show to some degree. What? To some degree? In the end, says Stephen A., the bosses weren't too happy with it, and that's where the probational period came from, too. So I thought Skip left that out, so I wanted to make sure I highlighted that. Stephen A., I love you, man, with all my heart and soul. But that is just so wrong. The biggest reason we were on probation, actually the reason we were on probation, was something that Rob Parker said about Robert Griffin on First Take. This was in December of 2012. So in December of 2012, Rob, as a contributor who occasionally came in to sit with us on First Take, made some remarks that unfortunately got him fired.
So you heard what Skip had to say in that soundbite. According to Skip, that's how the events unfolded. It was something that Stephen A. Smith did, and then he was like, but these are things that had happened prior to that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So what happened? Stephen A. Smith released a show yesterday for his Stephen A. Smith podcast, and it was kind of like a summary show. He spoke a little bit about Shannon Sharpe's debut on ESPN First Take. We actually covered that, talking about it was the second most viewed show of the year. The only show that had more views than that was the day after the Super Bowl. But yet those two show, the first show I think generated 724,000 viewers, and then the second show generated over 500,000 viewers. So he talked about that. But then towards the end of his show, he decided to address the comments that Skip Bayless made, to basically set the facts straight and basically say, Skip, I have no reason to lie to you. This situation ain't even all of that for me to be lying about it anyway. So what we want to do is want to play what Stephen A. Smith had to say here in response to Skip Bayless, and we'll come back and give you guys our closing thoughts. Take a listen to that there.
Skip Bayless, that is not the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God. So I don't mean to go against you or God himself, but I'm going to, in this particular instance, if the Lord himself disagreed with you, or agreed with you and disagreed with me, rather, I'm going to go against that. Love you too, brother. Always will. But let's get one thing straight right now. I don't lie. And I'm certainly not saying that you do, but I don't. Ain't important enough to lie, to be quite honest with you. So let's set the record straight with specifically that point. I don't recall my suspension being a part of the probationary period. I don't recall bringing that up because that did happen in 2014. You're absolutely right. And you are right when you bring up Rob Parker and what he wants, your colleague at Fox Sports 1 now. And those of you, by the way, who don't know, Rob Parker and I are very close. Rob Parker is a mentor and a friend who has been my friend for nearly 40 years. And to put it in its proper perspective, he's the godfather to my youngest daughter. That's how close Rob Parker and I are. So I don't bring that up to throw anything in his direction, but Skip was right about that being a part of the probationary period. What Skip is either wrong about or has forgotten was that the honchos at ESPN were not happy with the constant Tebow coverage every day. Jamie Horowitz was happy, our former boss. Skip was very happy. The ratings, it was generating ratings. Nobody's saying it was failing. But because the show was about Tim Tebow every day before I arrived, that was a problem for the bosses, Skip. You know that. So much so, Skip. Remember when you wondered aloud in a very stressful fashion? And I'm not getting in anybody's private business. I would never do that to you. You felt they gave you the impression that they were ashamed of the Tebow coverage, and you pounded your fist on the table and said, I'm proud of it. And I should be proud of it because we had the ratings. And I said to you, yeah, but we might not need to tell them that because we want to get on in the afternoons. Remember that? I do. No one is saying that Tim Tebow did not generate ratings. Nobody is saying that the show was not successful. Nobody is saying that the public at large, while some people abhorred it, a lot of people loved it. Nobody is saying that. All I'm saying is that by name, John Skipper, Norby Williamson, and John Waldhack, the three bosses who were in charge of ESPN at that time, was not proud of the coverage.
So you heard what Stephen A. Smith had to say in response to Skip Bayless there. Here are my thoughts. This thing is turned into like one big back and forth of he said, she said. Like, to be totally honest with you, like, who really cares how or what happened in the past? But these two gentlemen have extremely big egos, and I've noticed that both of them like to have the last word. Stephen A. Smith can never be wrong about anything. He can never be wrong. He always has to have the last word. And that's the same with Skip Bayless. And maybe Skip Bayless takes it he takes it. His is like way too extreme. And I saw that when when that Damar Hamlin situation happened, and then the next day Shannon Sharp came in, and Skip Bayless basically said, no, I stand on my thought. I stand on what I said. Like, I stand on it, right? Knowing that, bro, this wasn't necessarily the appropriate thing to say. To be quite honest with you, this particular situation here, I think a lot of us are sitting here scratching our heads saying, who cares? Like, who cares what happened? This happened over 5, 6, 7, 8, maybe 9 years ago, 10 years ago. Like, who really cares? That's number one. Number two, both of these gentlemen have clearly moved on. Like, Stephen A. Smith has moved on to do his own thing. Skip Bayless has moved on to do his own thing. Skip Bayless made it his duty to go at FS1 and really make those guys a competitor to ESPN. And in some aspects, they've achieved that. Stephen A. Smith took what was already a great show and took it to the next level. They're both very successful. Stephen A. Smith and Skip Bayless right now are competing. Let's just be honest about it. ESPN fired a lot of high-profile, front-facing personalities there at the network, and FS1 gobbled up a good amount of them. They got Rachel Nichols. They got Keyshawn Johnson. They got Michael Irvin. All of these people used to be employed by ESPN, right? Skip Bayless has adopted the format that he used to have on Cold Pizza, right? And then Stephen A. Smith went out there and poached one of the people that got let go of at FS1 by Shannon Sharp and bringing him into the fold, which we're going to get to a little bit later, because there was a pretty interesting post that Stephen A. Smith made on Instagram. I believe it was yesterday or the day before. So to me, listen, both of these guys are wildly successful. They're making millions of dollars. I think most people don't care, to be quite honest with you. They don't care what happened because, okay, so this happened there, this happened there. What is it really going to change? We already know what happened. You know, Skip has gone on to make his money. Stephen A. Smith has gone on to make his money, but you know, they just love to respond back and forth to each other. And I'm pretty sure that they figured out something, which is these back and forths that they have in the media, the public, generate views and ratings. They understand it, and I think it's one of the reasons that they're doing it. They understand that if we react to what this person said and I react to what that person said, it could generate some buzz, and I think that's one of the reasons that they're doing it, apart from the fact that they want to assure that their side of the story is being told. So what I want to know from you guys is, number one, do you think that this thing is going to continue to go on? Do you think there's even a need for it to go on? And number two, do you think, listen, hey guys, just let go, let's move on. That show was back in the day, years ago. It's water under the bridge. Let's move on. Whatever you guys think, please leave your thoughts in the comments, and we'll catch you guys on the next show. Peace.